Okay, I want to thank everybody for being here and joining us. We have Mitchell Hora with us today. Mitch, could you please introduce yourself and tell everybody where you're from and what you do?
Yeah, no, thanks, Liz, for having me on. I'm excited to dig into, especially on the regen verified side of things and what we're doing with soil testing and data and stuff overall, of course, too. But yeah, so I'm Mitchell Hora. I'm seventh generation on my family's farm. We're in Southeast Iowa, about 700-acre family operation, corn, soybeans, and rye. We'll see if we get crazier than that this year, but that's the plan for the most part. We've been using no-till since 1978. We've been using cover crops since 2013. So really deep into it. I got connected with this wild tool called the Haney test in 2015. And we've been using a heck of a lot of it on our operation over the last multiple years. Built Continuum Ag kind of around that tool. And now expanded into more holistic regen management. And we built a software and all kinds of stuff that we're going to dig into here and chat about. But yeah, today Continuum Ag has a footprint of 38 states and 15 countries. We just hired our 24th person here just a couple months ago. So been really exciting and continuing to build and just try to help more and more farmers understand soil health, understand soil is alive, implement these soil health principles and utilize some data to help along the way and help as many farmers as we can. It's been a wild ride and but we got a long way to go.
Okay, so since you mentioned it, go ahead and describe the topsoil tool and what you've created with your company.
Let me kind of tell probably the story, even kind of for your context, Liz, but for everybody else's too. So 2015, I got connected with the Haney test. We were doing some just some spot kind of checking at that point, typically where we'd go and sample a field with like the good zone, an average zone, and a poor zone is how we always used to do it. And we were just trying to figure it out, trying to learn, trying to figure out how to utilize the tool. And I built my company really around that, helping other farmers in Southeast Iowa and surrounding area, helping them to utilize this Haney test. I built a Excel file tool to help me to interpret the test and provide some analytics for the growers and provide some basic interpretation systems. We started building a really big data set, and I was trying to make fertilizer recommendations from the Haney test using SMS and existing data tools and utilizing my Excel files that I built. And it was just not working the way that we needed to. We need to be able to scale. And that's when we looked to build our own software to be able to manage the data. So essentially what we do now is we can take any farm boundary or a set of boundaries. We can run spatial variability assessments on it, utilizing our back-end machine learning systems to utilize existing data layers or new data that the grower or the consultant puts into the platform. We can look at all that field spatial variability, determine where we want to pull soil samples, whether that be for Haney testing or traditional soil analysis or carbon testing, what have you. We run the zones, send somebody out to the field to go pull soil samples like my people are doing down in Arkansas right now. We pull those samples, send them off to the lab of the customer's choice. And then the data comes back through and automatically maps back out to the unique ID where we can run the fertilizer recommendations. We can run the data through all of our analytics, and it just makes it so much more instantaneous. It's all web-based. The grower or the customer, they own their data the whole time. It's at topsoil.ag if anyone wants to check it out. Basically, we just want to be the easy place for this whole regen movement to be able to put together the soil data with the management data, tell our actual story, help our growers to implement, and having that data in a mappable visual format that farmers are used to seeing has been incredibly important for us to help our growers to use the data. You're muted, Liz.
Sorry. How exactly are the growers using their data? Is it all with precision ag? Is it just soil fertility? Is it monitoring soil health? Or what are they doing with the data?
Yeah, it's kind of a combo of all of them, but our typical farmer, we're going out there and doing zone analysis on every zone within the field for a precision ag fertilizer application purpose. So we do the test based on typically an average of 10-acre zones, and we charge $10 an acre. Okay, so makes it cost effective and competitive to do the Haney testing on a zone basis versus doing like grid analysis or other traditional soil analysis, that it makes it cost effective, makes it actionable, where basically what we are able to do is take the crop, the yield goal, whatever fertilizer the customer wants to use, and we can run the Haney recommendation or run the recommendations, but get there via the Haney test. So the key thing for me and how I think about it is, if we're going to grow a crop, it needs a total allotment of nutrients. Okay. And yeah, the soil is going to give us a good chunk of those nutrients, but we need to quantify what do we actually have available. And I like the Haney test because it not only shows me my inorganic nutrients, but also my organic nutrients, my biologically available nutrients. And then we're also fine tuning it with, well, what nutrients will come available as they release from my cover crop, from my crop residue, or released just naturally out of the system, or via application of manure, compost, or synthetic nutrients, whatever it may be. So to me, I like that we have our total overall need that we want to deploy to our crop to get a big yield. And we just fill that need bucket with more data so that at the end of the day, the farmer doesn't actually have to apply that much. And we ran an analysis looking at all of our farms from this past fall and looked at if they did just the recommendation, if they only looked at the inorganic nutrients in the soil and made the fertilizer recommendation, they would have applied a lot of fertilizer, of course. We compared that to our recommendation, looking at the inorganic plus the organic. And by looking at that holistic pool, we were able to dial back our customer fertilizer need by an average of $106.24 per acre just on NPK, which is just amazing. So let me restate that, because Liz, I mean, you guys have a bunch of data on the average fertilizer saving using inorganic only versus the Haney test. And we said, okay, well, we want to look at this for our customers and get our real numbers and update it with today's fertilizer prices, which are just stupid high. So we ran those numbers and we're able to cut the need for synthetic fertilizer by $106 an acre. And we charge our customers $10. So awesome ROI to utilize the Haney test to manage fertility, meet the customers where they're at, because farmers are going to use fertilizer. But we can help them to understand how much they actually need. And then as their system becomes more biologically driven, you can cut back further and further. And that's what we've seen on our farm. And what I like is that we're going out there to manage fertility, but we're also quantifying the biology and the water extractable carbon. And as we improve those pools, we can cut back even further on the synthetic inputs.
So when you get a Haney test report, it'll tell you the nitrogen savings in dollars. And I think right now that's based off of like 58 cents per pound.
Yeah.
And it's what, $1.20?
Yeah, some of it is, yeah, some of it's well over $1, of course, per unit. And what we were able to do is we utilized some publicly available fertilizer numbers that it was in an article with Successful Farming. So we don't want to just choose some random fertilizer price from the local co-op. So we utilized this article that was looking at the overall fertilizer prices. It was from November, I think, is when the article was published. So we want to keep those numbers up to date. And then what we actually do is that we provide the grower our showcased, hey, here's the fertilizer you can save, and here's what that means for you on dollars. If you want to plug in your actual cost of fertilizer, you can. And you work with your topsoil rep, plug in your actual cost of fertilizer. So that's not just us saying, hey, you could save $106 an acre, but plug in your actual fertilizer, and we can still show you what does this mean very specifically for your farm.
So yours is accounting for savings in P and K as well.
Just right? NPK. Yeah, it was just NPK.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And then you mentioned the cost savings, but you also, I think I've heard that you have planning tools in there.
Yeah.
And so what are those planning tools?
Yeah. So what we like to do, okay. So I started the company just doing Haney testing and just fertilizer recommendations. We built out and digitized the Haney recommendations and built on top of that our own recommendations, and really been able to scale and automate the whole system. On average, that returned $106 to our customer. Across our whole operation last year, we put $1.8 million into our customer's pocket. And that's after they paid us for the services, which is just crazy. Same thing, that 106, that actually is after they paid us to gather the data, which is just freaking cool. But it's not just, here, cut back on fertilizer. Like, that's not what I recommend. Don't just slice fertilizer, although a lot of farms definitely can, because we're over applying, and just naturally you can probably cut back and still be totally fine on almost every scenario. But many farmers need us to help them more holistically. It's not just about managing the fertilizer, but it's managing that biology overall, and systematically implementing the principles of soil health. So we've been able to be now contracted by some pretty large organizations who are going down this sustainability pathway, that are trying to help their network of farmers implement regen ag. Groups like Rabobank and SIBO and a wide array of others, and some that I can't mention here publicly. But these companies are hiring us in, saying, hey, we know that we got to help our farmers to become more sustainable, but we're not an agronomy company. So Continuum Ag, you guys help them to do it. So what we've done is that we help that farm to look at, what's your cover crop program, what's your tillage program, what's your fertilizer, what's your herbicides, just looking more holistically. We document all that, current and 10-year of historical practices. And then we help them to identify, well, what are some of your goals in the next couple of years? 5 years is kind of our average. And then we go and implement what we call our regen roadmap to document all this data, utilizing topsoil, and help these growers to systematically implement these practices, document the financial gains the whole time, document the financial risk the whole time. We have some free tools in topsoil as well, where you can model out some of your financial risk and financial gains. But really, this is just about, we got to help to make sure that the next wave of farmers has success at implementing these programs and these practices. There's only, most recent numbers I've got is 4% of farms in the country are using cover crops, only 4%, and about a third using no-till. So we have a long way to go. So all of us that understand this message, all of us on this call, we have to help everybody else to have success and implement. Those of us on the call that have been doing this for a long time, we've hit those road bumps, and we've stumbled and fallen and failed, and we've learned, and we've been able to overcome. But a lot of the later adopting farmers, they're not going to be able to battle like we have. They're not going to be able to withstand some of those major setbacks, that if they stumble and fall, they might not want to do it anymore. So we've got to make sure that they don't have those setbacks, that especially as we get more and more farms coming to the regen table, they've got to have success. And all we've done is just digitize and document a process to be able to help them get there, that we can just be a helping hand for these growers. And it's going to take everybody learning together. I think that's really the key, is just taking this whole network that's farmer first and farmer driven and taking it to the next step.
So when you talk about some of the risks and pitfalls, you said you mentioned some of those, and you can identify those through the platform, but can you list what you think might be the major risks or perceived risks that a new farmer might have approaching this system?
100%. And I mean, every farmer and all of us, out on the farm, like, you hear excuses from everybody all the time, and everybody's got a different one, and they are real. I mean, there's plenty of risk to this. And I always like to tell our story, that in our first year using cover crops, we didn't know what the heck we were doing. I wasn't in the network at that point. I wasn't in on the group. We were kind of just going at it blind. And Dad had the opportunity to get a little bit of cost share to plant cover crops through the state of Iowa. And he said, cool, here's a couple bucks. Some of the neighbors are doing this whole cover crop thing. Let's try it. And we had some side hills and stuff that he's like, yeah, let's do it. And he ran a trial. He was told, plant cereal rye, and planted at a bushel the acre. That was it. It was, here's some money, plant cereal rye, end of story. Well, Dad planted this cereal rye and didn't know how to set the drill. So it got on way too heavy. It was like 75, 80 pounds of rye per acre versus the 55 that he thought he was putting on, which even that was still too high. but his rye was way too heavy. He didn't change the fertilizer program, didn't change the herbicide program, didn't change the planter. He planted corn green into what planting time would have been 12 to 15 inch tall cereal rye at the 80 pound per acre rate. So it was way too thick. And he didn't change the fertilizer program, and he screwed up on the herbicide program, didn't get the rye killed the right way. And we had crazy bad carbon penalty because we threw off the carbon to nitrogen ratio. We didn't understand that at that time, that we had all this high carbon biomass. We didn't have our biological activity where it needed to be. We didn't have any organic nitrogen hardly at all in our soils at the beginning. This was 2015, 2016. And we really screwed things up. And I have some data that my C to N ratio, I've got some data showing it was even up to 70-1 soil C to N ratio. It is way out of it.
Stop there and explain a little bit about what that high C to N ratio does and how that affects like the nitrogen availability in the soil and why that was damaging to the crop.
Yeah, no, great question. And this is what we had to learn okay, this corn looks terrible. It's all yellow and way smaller. And this was in a side-by-side trial. I mean, I've got pictures and stuff, and it was crazy different. And so luckily with the Haney test, we knew, oh, this carbon to nitrogen thing, what the heck, we screwed it up. Well, what happens in my farmer understanding of all this stuff and how I like to teach it is that we want to maintain our carbon to nitrogen ratio below 20-1 if we want the soil to be mineralizing nitrogen back to our crop. And I've seen 24-1 or whatever. I like using 20-1 because it's easier. Okay, so 20-1, if I have my C to N ratio in my soil below 20-1, that means my microbes have enough organic nitrogen available to eat the carbon and to be releasing nitrogen back to my crop. And especially for a corn crop that's scavenging nitrogen, that's super important. My C to N ratio was up to 70-1. I had all this carbon out there. I did not have enough nitrogen to break down all the carbon. So I had fixation of nitrogen that the fertilizer that I put out there was now not biologically available for my corn crop. Rather, my microbes were trying to eat all this carbon that I'd just thrown out there. They're having a heyday, but in order to eat all that carbon, they needed nitrogen, and it wasn't organically available. It wasn't biologically available in the soil. So they utilized the nitrogen that I put out there as my fertilizer for my corn crop. They finally broke down all that high carbon biomass and released nitrogen back to my corn crop. And my corn still yielded 245. It was fine. But I know, but the check strip right next to it, that was my normal no-till program, it did 265. So in today's corn prices, that'd be a massive blow. But even at the price at that time, it was about $100 an acre loss in total. Now what we do is we don't plant super heavy, high C to N ratio cover crops ahead of corn, like a lot of cereal rye. We backed off and we used more winter wheat. We added in crimson clover, hairy vetch, and other legumes wherever we could. And we utilized light rates of cover crop, like 20 to 30, even 35 pounds of the cereal grass, and then a couple pounds of clover to not have all that biomass out there. It's still high C to N ratio biomass, but at least it's not as much overall volume. We are able to get our soils built up over time. And now we have to get more aggressive with a higher C to N ratio and higher biomass cover crop because we're pumping. Our soils are moving and they are eating that residue and cycling those nutrients back. So now we have to get more aggressive. But at the beginning, we needed to have somebody help and teach us that the soil is alive and that we have to balance the carbon to nitrogen ratio. And if we would have known that, we would have been okay. And we could have avoided these issues like we do now with our farmers all day, every day. But at the beginning, we didn't know that. Now we understand, and now we're getting more aggressive. But it's taken time to get our system up and going. And I was out on the farm Saturday morning. Dad and I, or over the weekend here, had a grad student out that was doing a project on us, and was out there with the thermometer. Our soil temperature was 39 degrees. This was Saturday afternoon. Okay, soil temperature at 4 inches, 39 degrees. I put the shovel in the ground, just screwing around. One little partial shovelful, and I had 9 worms in that just, it was in the top maybe 5 inches or so, probably a hole 6 inches wide, 5 inches deep, and maybe 5 inches across. So very small little hole, but yeah, I had 9 worms right there. And that soil was just pumping. It was 39 degrees. But my point being is, at the beginning, we didn't have the biological activity. Now I know through the Haney test that we do have the biological activity, but even here over the weekend, with just my shovel, I can see it. And our soils are so much better. Now we can get more biomass out there, more carbon out there to feed the system and still be able to maintain our crop yields.
Yeah. So as far as pitfalls go, do you, when you're working with someone like in the software or even on consulting, are you using that C to N ratio to advise what cover crops to put out and giving them recommendations not only on fertility, but other activities they can do on their farm to improve the biological activity?
Yeah, yeah. So, and basically where we're at now, okay, so Continuum Ag still does some work direct to farmer, and we work with these large corporations, like I said, and helping them and their farmers. But really, we want to help the rest of the agronomy network to utilize the software in the same way that we are. Okay, so we're a SaaS business model, software as a service. So anybody can utilize our tools and take that to your growers and utilize our business models. Overall, what I say now, okay, we have plenty of customers that we don't necessarily have the soil data for. So I say, hey, you can still go down the regen pathway without having soil data. It obviously helps. And I'm a data nut like you are. And so I'd love to have the numbers, I'd love to have the data, but you don't necessarily have to have it. Instead, especially if you're corn, soybeans in Iowa and you're just getting started, we're going to do cereal rye ahead of soybeans, ahead of corn. I'm going to recommend probably winter wheat, maybe some legumes in there. And it depends on when we can get the cover crop applied in the fall. That adjusts my recommendations as much as anything. And then in the spring, we're going to plant green and then we're going to terminate it. It's more so the CDN data, the biological activity data that enables us to understand how fast we can push to be more aggressive. At the beginning, for the most part, everyone pretty well in corn and soybeans, at least, there's a fairly simple starting point for most farms to get them going down the path. Then we can add data to fine tune and to tweak the program as we go. But I think for the most part, a lot of farms can get started and go to this route just by understanding the soil health principles. And then you can gather data as you go. Now, I love data at the beginning to get that initial baseline, of course, like our buddy Jeremiah likes to say, get the baseline, then build on top of it. But you can still start by implementing the principles and then gather the data when you're ready to.
So I was at an event this weekend and somebody asked a question to a panel, what would they recommend their first step be? So let's say you're completely conventional. What would the first step be on the path?
Yep. So my answer to that, now again, my context here is corn, soybeans, or even in other crops and stuff, I'd still be targeting like cereal rye, or down south, you could do black oats ahead of soybeans, or a different legume crop, or just something that is going to be less susceptible to that carbon penalty, like a grass corn is. So after the corn crop in the fall, I'm okay with, at that point, even, vertical tilling the corn stalks or doing something if you're really worried about it, or spread your cereal rye and then vertical till it in, or even just lightly disc it or something, like just to make that farmer feel comfortable that we're going to put cover crop out there in the fall, and then we're going to plant soybeans green into it in the spring. And even in year one, I still recommend planting green. And my farmers that are new to all this, here in a couple weeks, we're going to go plant soybeans into that green growing cereal rye. When the soil gets dry, or when the cover crop starts dropping pollen, or when the farmer finally is like, okay, I'm really scared, I'm going to go terminate that cover crop, then they go and spray the cover crop and get it terminated. Even in year one on soybeans. Light rates of cereal rye, though, is what I would recommend. I still like planting my soybeans kind of early into that cover crop because I know that the cover crop and the beans are going to work well together. I can get my soybeans out there early so that they can emerge, get up and growing, and be more competitive height wise and energy wise compared to the cover crop. But number one is we've got to get some initial good wins on the cover crop itself and on the soil health side itself. And cereal rye with the soybeans is the best way to be able to do that, because I can be aggressive in the spring after planting to let the cover crop keep growing. We hardly ever see any kind of yield impact with soybeans going into cover crops. Doesn't take really any other management or tweaking to equipment. It's fairly foolproof to be able to do it. And you can get those quick wins. But number one here with all this and how I like to teach growers, step number one to go into this route is that cover crop or the no-till or these principles at large, implementing the principles and practices to do it. It's got to be a offensive management decision. And these practices are offensive tools, meaning don't just put out a cover crop to add defense against erosion or defense against water quality issues or whatever it may be, but utilize that cover crop as your offensive management tool. That cover crop is your nutrient stabilizer. It's your herbicide program. It's your moisture management program. It's your pest management program. So many offensive things, which triggers us as farmers to utilize it as an asset, not just utilize it as, here's this cover crop that maybe somebody's paying me to do, or I don't know if this stuff's going to work. I'm just going to throw it out there because I've got this crappy side hill. No, use it as your offensive management tool, and then you can manage it accordingly.
That's interesting because I've heard many different philosophies on how to talk to farmers about using cover crops. And a lot of people say it's okay, no, we're doing this for weed control, or we're using this for erosion control or something like that. And using it as an offensive tool, I guess, speaks more to a farmer mentality. Me not being a farmer, I'm asking this question. But also, what are the other mental barriers you think that people have when starting to use cover crops, and how do we get around that, and how do we help people?
Yeah, no, good question. So back to the farmer mentality of this offense thing. So I only really uncovered that thought process of that these practices have to be an offensive management tool. I've really been harping on that maybe just for the last couple of years is all. I didn't really get that at the beginning. But farmers are used to buying the best, buying high dollar seed or the best quality seed because they believe it's going to be the best offensive tool to get the maximum yield. They buy a pound of nitrogen for every bushel of their yield goal because that's what they were taught, that it takes a pound of nitrogen to produce a bushel of corn. They buy that fungicide because it's seen as an offensive tool to manage against disease, but more so to push yield. And it's that offensive mindset that they're going after, and they're happy to spend tons of money to do it. But spending $10 an acre on cover crop seed, that's just seen as kind of throw it out there and hopefully you protect against some erosion, that doesn't have the same trigger back to that grower's bottom line. But if I can utilize that cover crop to stabilize hundreds of pounds of soil nutrients and release it back in a stabilized, biological, more protected manner for my cash crop in season, now it's a better change of mindset. But other things I think that they're really, scared about is number one, is that cover crop going to get away from me, and how am I going to manage it in the spring, or is it going to screw up other things? I've seen it screw up corn. We saw it on our own farm, but on soybeans, we're taking our rye all the way to harvest and still have an amazing soybean yield. So I really don't know that we can screw that up that bad. Of course, there are issues, and you can get slugs, or you can get, other issues and stuff. And you can hold in some cold temperatures at night if you're in the far northern part of the country, but not that far. Northern Iowa and stuff, guys had some issues last year, but I think it's just being able to baby step into it is really crucial too.
That was another question I was going to ask. What is the longest you've let cereal rye or something go into soybeans? And you just mentioned that you've let it go all the way to harvest.
July, yeah.
Yeah. And so when you did that, did you lose yield in soybeans and, address looking at that yield wise versus ROI wise?
Oh yeah. So about 3 years ago, it would have been 4 years ago or so now in the fall, we were looking at buying our cover crop seed. Cereal rye was in short supply, and I'm buddies with the local seed dealer, Stout Seeds. And I said, Trent, hey, no big deal. Why don't we just buy the winter wheat? You can keep the rye and sell that to the rest of your customers. No big deal. It's about the same price. We'll just use it. And I was like, well, Dad, I mean, cover crops are going to continue to really be a thing. And especially here in Washington County, Iowa, where there's a lot of farmers that are using this stuff, this is going to be an ongoing issue. How are we going to address it? And we said, why don't we try to grow our own cover crop seed? Well, just growing small grains with the yields that we can get here and with the dollars coming in doesn't really pay the bills. Our land expense is too high. Some of our fixed costs are just at this point, at least, still just kind of too high to make it really work to just grow a small grain. So we said, well, hey, we've been working with this crazy guy, Lauren Steinlage. He's been doing this relay crop stuff. Why don't we try that? So for the last 3 years, we plant our soybeans in the spring into our winter cover crop. And then we wait until the cover crop is ready to be harvested. And we harvest the cover crop over the top of the soybeans. So for cereal rye, that means July 10th or so, we're harvesting 5 foot tall cereal rye over the top of almost hip high soybeans. And we're running over the soybeans underneath the tractor tire or underneath the combine tires. But in replicated trials now for the last 3 years with the Iowa Soybean Association, we've seen an average yield loss of only 3/4 of a bushel of soybeans. 3/4 of a bushel. That's it. Mine last year, I did 20 bushel rye and 70 bushel soybeans. First couple year before, 30 bushel rye, 70 bushel soybeans. We had a different farm where the rye was thin. It wasn't even supposed to be a relay crop. It was our regular super light rate of just VNS cover crop with no fertilizer, no nothing. And it yielded 15 bushel rye. And the beans whole farm average did 15 bushel better than it had ever done before. And a lot of other people in our area had great soybean yields. But what we're seeing is we can harvest rye and still maintain amazing soybeans. Last year was our best yields ever for soybeans across the board, and doing it with no additional inputs really going into it. We got an extra combine pass. We've played around with fertilizer a little bit. We played around with fungicide a little bit, but it's just been amazing to see we can harvest it. Last kind of point on that is to the profitability component. Yeah, we're seeing an extra about $200 an acre profit in the relay crop versus our sole soybeans only. But what's really interesting to me too is that the following spring, with the weekly Haney testing that we've been doing, we've seen an increase in organic nitrogen of 60 units of nitrogen per acre come available where we had that relay crop. And what I'm seeing is that our soybeans that are in that system have no synthetic nitrogen available. There is no readily available nitrogen in that soil because that massive cereal rye going full to maturity, it's using all of it. There is not nitrate and ammonium just sitting out there. So our soybeans, they've got to work and they nodulate like crazy. And that's why I'm still getting awesome soybean yields, but also feeding my corn crop for the next year an extra 60 units. In the fall, following our soybeans, we're seeing 100 to 120 units of organic nitrogen available in our fields. 100 to 120 quantified in the organic form, readily available for my corn crop for the next year. So upping my profitability by even more than that 200 that I already mentioned.
Okay, I have two questions. But first, so how long after harvest are you seeing of soybeans? Are you seeing the organic nitrogen becoming available? Because I know you've done lots of monthly, weekly,
Yeah.
daily, probably testing.
Yeah.
How long does it take? Does the soybean plant have to be completely decomposed before
No.
it starts releasing nitrogen, or when does that happen?
No, I mean, I'm just seeing the total water extract. Where the numbers are coming from is just my water extractable nitrogen, total water extractable nitrogen. And then we take out the nitrate and the ammonium. So we were just looking at some stuff from this one would have been 2 years ago on our home farm. This was sampled like November 10th or so. The soybeans would have been harvested in middle, or those ones probably would have been for early October. Like say they were harvested on October 10th and then we're soil sampling on November 10th, about a month later. And that's when I was seeing the 100 to 120 units of nitrogen available in the organic form. That was based on the zone-based Haney testing. My nitrate levels were only from 5 to 10 part per million nitrate. That's it. Very, very low nitrate at that time. Hardly anything left. Single digit nitrate, but 100 to 120 pounds in the organic form. It was just amazing to be able to see. And like I said, then even the next spring, I'm seeing an extra. That was in a different replicated trial where I had the regular soybeans compared to relay, and in the relay there was 60 units extra available. That was in May of the following year after the soybeans. So I think, and to your question, Liz, because I haven't really answered it that well, I'm seeing that there's a lot of nitrogen out there and it's in the organic form, which obviously we can argue on whether or not that would be available kind of as you're asking the question, but
we don't need to argue about that.
yeah, definitely out there in that available form, but it's stable in the organic pool, not sitting out there as nitrate or ammonium.
And then for the rye, like, and again, I don't farm in Iowa. I mean, do all elevators take rye where you're at, or do you have a special contract for that?
Yeah, good question. We're keeping it all just for cover crop seed. Okay, so you could definitely feed it like for hogs. We got a lot of pigs around. I've had some, there's plenty of other farmers in the area that have grown rye for part of their feed rations, which is great. But feed rye, you'd be getting feed pricing versus we're looking at growing it for cover crop seed. We can clean it. We've been getting it germ tested. It does just fine. For the most part, we've been using it on our own farm, plus just a couple other local farmers around us. We haven't, this year, we had a total of about 80 acres or so that we did of this. We've done 10 acres the last 2 years. Before that, 80 acres this past year. And now this year we'll continue to do a lot of relay cropping. The big thing for me is it just opens up options. Yeah. I've got my cover crop out there in the fall anyway. If it looks good, I can keep it growing, especially if I'm wet. And I don't, if I'm wet in the spring, I can keep that going and harvest the rye over the top of the soybeans, not hurt soybean yields and get all these soil health gains. It's like, okay, let's do that. Now we haven't done all 350 acres because the biggest concern for our operation is harvesting that rye needs to really happen in a pretty specific window. And to cover 350 acres in like a couple days, that's gonna be tough. That's been our biggest concern towards scale, is just the logistics of getting it all done.
Okay, we have a question. What's your planting rate when you're doing the rye soy relay crop?
Yeah, good question. Okay, so a lot of other guys have been playing around with this. Like I mentioned, Lauren Steinlage has been pushing hard on this. Michael Vidto's been pushing hard. Kyle Schnell, a bunch of other really key guys that have been pushing hard on this. We're only going our normal cover crop planting rate on this rye. Okay, I've got some of it that was that harvested at about 15 bushel the acre harvest. That was only planted at about 45 pounds to the acre. My normal relay crop, I'm planting it at about a full bushel, usually 55 to 60 pounds. VNS rye. This year we're trying some Elbon rye to try some, varietal, but Elbon is definitely not the ideal rye that we want. We were looking for Yankee rye. That's what Lauren had recommended, but they didn't have any available when I was getting it bought. Cover crop seed at large last year was in short supply. We said, sure, what the heck, we'll try Elbon. I'm sure it's not going to yield anything great, but I'm really only looking for, I would love 30 to 35 bushel the acre would be awesome. I'm assuming the Elbon's only going to do maybe 15 to 20 again. Kind of like it's a forage rye. Yeah, so good question. Elbon's a forage rye developed at the Noble Foundation. It's not necessarily, designed for good seed production, but it looks amazing out there right now. Like I said, we're just out at the farm checking on plots and stuff over the weekend, and you can see that Alban rye versus our regular VNS rye plain as day. It is way bigger, way thicker, way more alive and more green. I'm definitely getting more activity right now, more carbon drawdown, more aggressive cover crop growth here. A lot of guys in this area that are deep into covers really like that Alban rye because it greens up so early in the spring in our geography here in Southeast Iowa. Really good biomass coverage. So I think it will be really good for us to, harvest and keep as our own cover crop seed, but the yields are just not going to be amazing. But in my relay crop system, my number one objective is the soybean yield and profit, of course. The rye is basically just a bonus. So I'm fine with not having amazing yields.
Why did Lauren recommend the Yankee rye?
He's seen just being able to get better yields with it. Just a better yielding rye that's still going to get us the overwintering and everything that we want from a cereal rye, but it was just from a yield perspective.
Okay. And then what is your rotation after you do the rye soy relay?
Yeah. So, I mean, our whole operation is still just a corn soybean operation. Okay. So I'm harvesting corn, then I plant cereal rye, and then I plant soybeans. And that's what we do all the time. But in the relay, I'm just harvesting that rye rather than terminating it. My typical termination is when the rye starts dropping pollen. Okay. So my rye's headed out, kind of starts right at pollen drop. That's when we hit it with Roundup and terminate the cover. We've done the roller crimper as well, where we've roller crimped when the beans are between V1 and V3, we can roller crimp, but typically we're spraying. So let me back that up. The first thing that we do to our farm here in the month of April is going to be go and plant soybeans. We're targeting between April 15th and April 20th. We're going to go plant soybeans. And the rye is all out there and growing right now. We'll start with our non-relay crop farms. I'm anticipating planting the relay crop between April 20th and April 25th, just a little bit later than that super early stuff. All of our beans will be planted with no seed treatments. We're 100% naked soybeans. These are super cheap Stein soybeans, nothing fancy at all. We've extended our maturity of the soybeans. For our area, we typically always used to plant a 2.8 to a 3.4 maturity soybean. Now we're planting a lot of 3.6s, even 3.8s. So I like having fuller season because I'm planting early and because of the photo period and the light utilization and the timing of when I'm terminating the cover crop or when I'm harvesting the rye as a relay. But following all these soybeans, it'll just be back to corn every time. So following these beans, I'll have plenty of volunteer rye out there. If I am relay cropping it, I'm not going to get every seed in the combine and I'll blow plenty of them out the back. And so I'll have some volunteer out there, but then we'll go and reseed some more cereal rye with some legumes as well before my 2023 corn crop.
Have you done relay cropping with rye and legumes and soy, or does that defeat the
Yeah, good question. Actually, yeah, but not necessarily because we're meaning to do it. We're just out there screwing around with stuff. And so one of my plots last year was in my 60-inch corn. And if anyone was at my field day, it would have been in 2020 field day. So at my 2020 field day, we interseeded the 60-inch corn with the Rantizo drone and also with a Montag air delivery system on a rotary hoe. So I had 60-inch corn with nice diverse cover crops in it. And then after harvesting my corn in 2020, I planted some more cereal rye so that I had more even coverage and because I knew I wanted to relay crop it. Then we planted the beans. Then when I went to harvest my relay crop last year, I had cereal rye, but I had annual rye, rapeseed, hairy vetch, all kinds of crap in there. I think I'm missing a couple things, but you get the point. Anything that overwintered from my 60-inch, I was getting some of it in. Now, plenty of those crops are not that tall. So I had plenty of seed that I left out there. I was only able to harvest a little bit of those diverse seeds. And we're just running it in our bin, blowing a little bit of air on it, bagging that cover crop seed just in mini bulk bags left over from our soybeans or in pro boxes or back in the seed tender. and I'm just using it for more cover crop seed anyway. So who cares if I've got rapeseed and hairy vetch and annual rye and all this other stuff in it? Cool. Like, let's do it. I'm growing my own diverse cover crop blends. Now for our system, because I'm drilled beans and drilled rye, I should have specified that earlier. Okay. A lot of guys are having great success doing relay cropping in actual rows, which is probably what you should do to get better yields and to control things a little bit better. For my system, it's all drilled, 7.5-inch spacings. It's going every which way. We just got a mess out there. And I'm just harvesting the rye over the top of the beans. It's worked really well for the last 3 years. It utilizes our equipment that we already have. But because of that, I have to have my cutter bar fairly high. So some of those diverse crops, not all of it made it in the combine, but that's fine. They're all growing again and going to feed my corn this year. So it's great.
Awesome. I know we kind of went down a different path there than we had.
Yeah, no, that's what I was thinking. I'm like, we're supposed to be talking about the regen verified stuff. I love talking about the farm, obviously, and can tell all kinds of stories.
Asking questions because I don't I don't farm, and I think it's really interesting. But yeah, so going back, you had mentioned that you work with several companies using topsoil, and there are different applications of the topsoil tool.
Yeah.
So I know we are using it for regenerative verification.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about like how you're using it for other tools first, that'd be fine.
Sure. Yeah. So a little bit more explanation stuff there. I'll put our cover crop and stuff to bed. Tom's got a question in the chat, and just real quick, that on our corn, I'm planting corn. So we're going to plant soybeans first for the most part, probably at least a couple days. Then we're going to switch to corn to let the cover crop grow a little bit. We're terminating the corn probably about 10 days after planting. We'll terminate the cover crop right before the corn emerges. The corn will have a post pass of herbicide before crop canopy. The soybeans we're planning on one pass, and that's a quart of generic Roundup on the beans. That's it. Even with this year's prices, we're talking a $11, maybe $12 an acre herbicide program on beans. That's it. On the corn, Roundup, atrazine. We'll heat up the blend a little bit with some 32%. That's helped a lot, balancing seed to N ratio a little bit too. So I like that a lot. I'm burning down the cover crop, but that's it for the most part. There's more resources on my social medias and stuff too. But okay, topsoil. There's anybody could go to topsoil.org or topsoil.ag. It's all totally free to get started. You can see our demo farms, play around with it however you'd like. That's what it's there for. How growers or how customers are using it. We have direct to farmer, that we have farmers coming in that are working with us. They want Haney testing, they want regen verified testing, or they want assistance with how do I implement these regen practices at large. Our business model is we have our $5 an acre regen roadmap subscription, and then we can add soil sampling as needed. Okay, so we're basically $5 an acre plus soil sampling is what we do. So and that's just if you want to go down the actual regen roadmap kind of pathway with us. That's how we do it. And we do that same type of business model for Fortune 100 enterprise companies, helping their farmers, just like we do going directly to help your family farm. We work with consultants as well. If you're an agronomist, you want to offer regen verified, you want to help your farmers navigate carbon markets, you want to help your farmers to access the Haney test, work with whatever lab you want, utilize the tool. We'll help you to connect in that data, and you can utilize our business models, utilize our marketing tools, utilize our algorithms that we've built, and then we share in the business model with you, so that as you're making money, we're making money. With the main focus, the farmer's got to make money. So plenty of our growers, basically where, looking at other stuff too, Liz, on how we're using topsoil, basically plug in a big old set of shape files. We run the analysis on it and tell you where we want to pull soil samples and what needs to be done and what the price is going to be. We can help you to look at, here's your management practices. Here's where you could be. Let's help you to get there and implement the regen roadmap. We've got really cool financial planning tools and stuff too, where we can help you to run all the different scenarios to make sure that you understand what's the optimum path towards doing all this stuff focused on profitability, because that's what we have to be. Whether you're a large land manager, a land investor, a farm, an agronomist or a farmer, whatever. We've got to be able to implement these principles in a manner that we're tracking our data, and we're being risk adverse as we implement the practices. And that's why I really like the regen verified metrics and stuff that you guys have now, Liz, to be able to help us to say, hey, yeah, we're seeing some improvements here and we're implementing these practices. And yeah, we're seeing our Haney score go up, or our biological activity score go up. But what does that really mean? And how do I tell that story? So that's where I think the regen verified and just so many different certification programs that farmers can utilize. Whatever's going to help you tell your story, let's do it. Like, we've got all the data, and that's why I really like with topsoil and why I'm all over the place with my answer too. It's all it is let's put together our story into a place where you own it as a farmer, you own your data, it's protected. That's why I built the tool, because I'm a farmer, I'm an agronomist. I didn't want us having our data in somebody else's stuff. I wanted to protect it, so that's why we built our own. So we just want to help you to protect your data too. Utilize it if you want to do regen verified, or you want to enroll in a carbon program, or you just want to communicate with your landlord or whatever. Cool. Like, let's help you to actually utilize this data.
So we'll back up on regenerative verified, and I'll just give a brief explanation of what that
Yeah.
is. So we launched that, I think, about a month ago. And what it involves is getting a hold of me or Russell Hedrick. You can go on our website and get our information. And we can bring in your fields into topsoil, provide you with where to do the soil sampling. We tell you how to do the soil sampling. We anonymize your information so that when it's sent to the lab, you get an unbiased result on your test. Those results go back into topsoil, and then we can verify that you are doing, as a farmer, at least one regenerative practice. And we have lots of different ways that we can verify that. But the whole reason we set it up this way is because, like Mitch said, we want you to own the data, you to be able to see the results. The test that we're pulling is a 0 to 6 and a 6 to 12 Haney test. The lab has some calculations that they can use to compare your baseline soil with your upper management zone, so that we're not comparing your soil in North Dakota, where Deanna lives, with Mitch's soil, where he's, accidentally growing 260 bushel corn. And so we want to make sure that it's fair for the farmer. And then the reason that we don't have a massive checklist of what you have to be doing, you can do this, 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 and not this, this, and this, is because we know that sometimes your fields are going to get flooded, and you're going to probably have to go in there and, fix out some spots using a little bit of tillage, or some years you might get a really bad weed infestation and have to do something about it. So we don't want to be too prescriptive on the practices, so that it's farmer friendly and very practical. And that's the regenerative verified process. And where that ends up is at, we are actively building out markets where people are very interested in regeneratively grown and regenerative verified agricultural products in their end consumer products.
Mm-hmm. I think it's just telling that story. I mean, that's what this all boils down to for me. Like, hey, are any of these like data components the end all be all? No, like they're not. It's gonna continue to progress. It's a great tool to help us to make better decisions, put dollars back in our pocket, and continue down this pathway for right now. But we just have to be able to tell that story to up the supply chain here as well, help them to understand, like, hey, what we're doing here is actually helping you guys. It also helps us, but help us to invest back into our operations where we're stacking these outcomes. I think that's the opportunity that we can really quantify within this stuff is, hey, we're not only improving the quality of the product that we're taking to you, but because of the practices, we're improving our impact on water quality, and we're drawing down carbon, and we're gaining all these other things because we're going down this regen pathway. I just,
And the
I
whole
think there's so many
incentive for
farm,
why we started this whole program is because we know so many people are doing all of these practices that are improving water quality and improving the environmental outcomes on the farm and off the farm and down the stream into the watershed, and
Yeah.
creating more nutrient dense foods. And at this point in time, hardly anybody's getting a premium for that. And
No.
we believe that farmers should be getting a premium for doing the right thing. And so we're trying to create that market and tell the story so that the consumer understands it, because consumer demand is really going to drive where
I mean,
this
it's
goes.
the chicken and the egg that
Right.
they say, hey, we want to have. I think there's more and more people that are understanding they want regenerative. They might not know what regenerative is yet, which to me, my definition of regenerative is that it's a continual implementation of the principles of soil health. To me, it's here's the principles. You're continuing to push and get better and better every year at implementing those principles. To your point, Liz, it's not just here. If you're doing no-till and you're doing cover crops, you check the box and you're done. No, it's you've got to systematically be implementing these things and building that up. And as you go year over year, you're really going down that regen pathway. And it is a journey. I mean, we hear that all the time, but it 100% is.
Well, and the other neat thing is that, even if you don't meet the regenerative certified tests that shows that your soil is actively being regenerated, we have the data now in a platform, and we have the ability to look at that data and help you walk down the path so that next year you might be, or in a couple years, and what are the practices that you can implement to go down that path.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's why I really like being part of this program here from the beginning too, that number one, I mean, yeah, shoot, we built the tool literally to be in a perfect position for this kind of program to document regen verified or whatever other type of soil metrics or farm metrics you want to track. But it's, even if you don't meet the criteria today, then we can say, well, hey, here's a path on how we can get there. And here's what it's going to mean for your operation. And here's what it looks like as we improve. And here's what it's going to mean for your finances. Like, yeah, it's great to have the check box, to have the stamp of approval, be regen verified, but let's go and implement a system to be more profitable. And then that outcome is going to be an awesome cherry on top to help us to hopefully open up new market opportunities and get paid more. But it's because we're managing holistically to improve our profits at large. So
So
I don't know. I think it's good.
we have 1 minute left.
I know. I yapped for what, Liz? Have you been timing me? That I talked for what, 56 minutes of our 59-minute conversation here.
Yeah, pretty much. But I'm used to that.
I know. I figured.
Have any questions? You can unmute. Feel free to ask a question.
Yeah, I don't have a hard stop right now. So if anyone's got a couple, or obviously this being recorded too, people can find me other places as well.
Well, if everybody's gonna be quiet, let's see. What do we have coming up? Let's see. Wednesday, we have Clean Water Wednesday at Textile Brewing Company in Dyersville, Iowa.
Yeah, me and Liz can hang out all week together. It's going to be awesome.
Yep. And then coming up after that, I think we have a couple more webinars. We're doing one in a couple weeks with Russell will be on here talking about implementing the soil test on his farm and how that's helped him in nutrient management. And then we have Adam Darty talking about cover cropping and the effects on the environment and the results he's seen on the soil tests he's been doing. He does a little bit different testing than we do. He likes to incorporate PLFA a lot. Then in June 1st and 2nd, we'll all be down here in Salado, Texas at Farming for the Future. We've got, let's see, Rick Clark, Jimmy Emmons, Adam Chappell, Rick Haney, Lance Gunderson, Russell Hedrick. I'm sure there'll be a few other surprise guests along the way. We'll be doing lots of shop talk, so farmer to farmer networking, lots of time to spend asking questions about your operation to each of the speakers and other farmers that are there. We, of course, scheduled a 3.5 hour happy hour so that we can really get to talk.
Makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. And so that's June 1st and 2nd. And then we go up to Mitch's right after that.
Yeah. Yeah. So our field day is June 6th. So we'll be in Iowa, a bunch of really awesome speakers, of course, there. Looking at probably 400 people or so. But really just a lot of those overall conversations too. Same thing, you know, Liz, like you're talking, it's about coming and seeing everybody, hearing the updates. There's no PowerPoints. There's nothing like that. It's and for the most part this year, for anyone that was there last year, our format is going to be get a couple producers or a couple key folks up there, each give a 5 to 10 minute talk, and then take Q&A for the remainder of the 1 hour session. So 3 people giving a 5 to 10 minute tee it up, and then a facilitated Q&A for the remainder of the time. So really quick hitting, in-depth, very specified information. So I think it'll be an awesome one. So Washington, Iowa, June 6th, and more info on our website and stuff there too. I'm sure we'll share it out within the within you guys' stuff. Soul Regen's helping out as a sponsor and stuff with it. So we'll get the word out there.
We're just gonna caravan.
Yeah, everyone's going down to Texas, and then we're coming back up to Iowa. But yeah, it'll be awesome.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. So I think that's the main one on ours. Anybody, of course, can check out me and Liz have another chat on my podcast too, Top Soul Podcast. If you want to hear me and Liz talk. Yeah, I went a couple weeks ago.
Oh, whoops.
So Liz doesn't listen to the Top Soul Podcast.
I kept looking for it, but I kept seeing everybody else pop up.
I'm pretty sure it went out.
I don't think so.
That's an Emily thing.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll let everybody go. Thank you for being on, and
yeah, this was fun.
I could talk all day, so we should probably stop.
Yeah. Thanks, Liz. Always good to chat, and I will see you tomorrow.
Okay. See you tomorrow.